Welcome to another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Today, my guest, Dr. Britt Andreatta, is used to having people introduce her because she's that big. But today, I'm going to make Britt introduce herself. So, Britt, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself.
I love that, Justin. My name is Britt Andreatta. I am the CEO of Brain Aware Training, and I write books on the brain science of success. I synthesize research from neuroscience, biology, and other sciences, along with big data on business issues from global giants like McKinsey and Gallup, turn it into practical takeaways for learning practitioners in particular, and then those of us who have jobs, how to make the world of work a little bit more enjoyable and productive for all. Personally, I'm a mom of a teenager, so that's going real well with driving and snarkiness and all that fun stuff. I am married to my husband of 20 years. I identify as bisexual for the listening audience. I'm also a cat owner, so I'm oftentimes chasing lizards and gophers out of my house that have been brought in as gifts. Luckily, my kitties like to bring them to me live. My favorite one was a snake. So yeah, that's all good.
Okay, Britt, seriously, you just blew my mind for a second. I've known you for 8 years. We've become better friends over time, and you have never disclosed to me your identity as bisexual.
Well, I mean, it's out there in the world. I've been public about it. So maybe you just didn't read the right thing.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that.
Well, it's interesting too. As someone who's been married and in a committed relationship for 20 years, I'm not exactly out on the dating scene or going to clubs and saying, who am I attracted to? That part of my life is settled, but I still very much identify as bisexual. That's part of my identity, but you probably don't see me actively engaged with that exploration anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. What other, people are getting used to with this podcast, we usually have our guests dig into some of their identities. What other identities would you like to pull out for our conversation today?
Yes. So for the listening audience, I am a white woman and I have an Irish background. I'm as white can be. I kind of glow a little bit blue in the sun. So I burn, don't tan. I'm a first generation person. My parents didn't complete college, but I have a PhD. I grew up very low income, but am doing okay now. I am the child of a single mom with mental illness and have grown up in some abusive environments and had to do a lot of therapy to work through that. I consider myself an anti-racist. It's a lifelong journey to unlearn privilege and bias and the things that we were taught. I consider myself a committed ally to all communities. I think those are the big ones.
Yeah, those are good. I get the unlearning thing. It takes work for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as a mom, I've had so much of my internalized patriarchy and sexism really slap me in the face because a thought will pop in my head of something to say to my daughter. And it just shocks me sometimes. Like, oh, boys won't like it if you're too this, or boys won't like it if you're too that. And I don't say it out loud, but it's just like, oh gosh, that tape is there. The amount of things that I find myself thinking that I don't believe. So there's this whole internal tape of thoughts that have been installed that come to the surface, and they're a little shocking sometimes. Then you're like, wait, where did that come from? That is not who I am or what I believe. But a lot of stuff comes up. I'm seeing a lot of the internalized sexism right now as a mom of a teenage girl.
Yeah. As someone who does a lot of research in neuroscience and studying behavior, I think we'll definitely come back to what you're finding in the research around that. Like, here's these things that I'm popping up that I want to say that I actually don't believe is an interesting thing to look at. But I want to get into the stuff that I love talking about, digging into some of the personal experiences of our guests. I know you're familiar with the Creating Belonging model, and I would love to hear if you could pick one area of the model that you have an experience that you could relate to and share that with us.
Yeah, for the one that really stands out to me is overbearing, because as a white person, I was very much raised with total blinders on around the impact of race, and that my race meant something, and that my experience of race was very different than other people's experience of race. This all kind of came to my attention in college Those blinders were ripped off very quickly and painfully, but I'm so grateful that they came off. I remember to this moment, the really shocking experience that I had that started my exploration. It was when I was on a summer trip with a group of friends, and there's like 5 or 6 of us. All of us were white except for Carell Augustus. He's a famous photographer. He wasn't famous then. And we all went on a trip to Napa Valley. And we had been in a grocery store and realized one of the wineries we were going to was closing. And so we were all rushing. Many of us had gotten out in the car, and Carell was coming out of the store. And I was like, Carell, run, we're going to be late. And he just kept walking. And we were like, Carell, hurry, come on, run, Carell, run. And he just sauntered his way over and got in the car. And we were like, dude, we're going to be late. And he looked at us and he was like, I am a Black man. I will never run from a store. Do you understand that I could get killed for that? And we were all just gobsmacked and shocked. And then he went on to explain how much he experiences racial profiling. Even the act of running from a store could be enough of a trigger for a person or a police officer to assume guilt first. It makes me sad just to think about it. I mean, I could hear the pain in his voice. And that was when I realized that he lived in a very different world than I did. Many of us really dug into the work and did some intentional learning around privilege, bias, and race. Of course, that leads you to all the other isms too. And so I think that's what's hard about these conversations, is that I know that people of color, people who are in marginalized communities, live the pain of being the target all the time. But there's also pain when you learn that the world you thought you lived in doesn't exist. And it's really hard to deal with that. Sometimes it's called white fragility, sometimes it's called white guilt, but I also think it's just the shock and horror of realizing that you've been not only lied to about what the world really is, but you've been participating in it in ways that you didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
You made me cry in the first 5 minutes, Justin.
I know. Look at me. I'm the new Barbara Walters. I make a little joke about how the stories that I share about myself in the book are in belonging. And the stories I share, especially in overbearing, are always of other people. I know so much of my life I've been in a place of overbearing. I talk a lot about growing up in rural Iowa and the extreme blinders that puts on one. And then kind of going along my journey and embracing my gay identity, holding on to my gay identity as like, oh, well, I'm marginalized too. So I'm just like everyone else who's marginalized. And I held that until, more recent than I like to admit, that I finally realized that, while I have that part of my marginalized identity, I have a lot of other privileged identities. So, the work of the book got me into thinking about all the times that I've been overbearing and all the things that I've done that have hurt other people without realizing it. That overbearing one is interesting. And I think it's powerful when we can find when we've been there, because it's really hard. We don't see ourselves as bad people. And so when we look at things like being overbearing, well, gosh, I would never do that to someone, but we do.
Yeah. And I think this intersectionality, like we can go through each type of identity. Being married is a privilege. Being middle-aged is a privilege. And you lose that privilege when you're a child, and you lose it again as you age. We all go in and out of privileged and targeted communities. But then, of course, depending on your background, you could be overwhelmingly stacked in the privilege side, right? So Carell and I have been lifelong friends. And last year, I had the privilege of going to his book signing. He just produced a book called Black Hollywood, Reimagining Iconic Movie Moments, where he took all these classic movie moments from Singing in the Rain and King Kong and reimagined them with Black actors. And I loved it. I loved seeing that representation. I loved seeing the beauty of his work. But of course, he got a lot of pushback. I just saw The Little Mermaid last weekend, which is also having pushback. It's amazing how much privilege colors people's views of what they think they're entitled to. I'm entitled to have my characters look the way I want them to look, and I want them to reflect me. It's interesting how much the discomfort of difference really freaks people out.
Mm-hmm. I think part of it is change, which I know you've researched the neuroscience behind how we react to change. And so I think part of it is just that, and people feeling like they're losing something, which is
Yes.
unfortunate because you're not.
Right. A lot of our resistance to change is that we first perceive change as potential danger. Our biology is wired that way. We focus on all the things that could go wrong or that we could lose, again, wired for our survival. Over time, we can start to embrace the new idea and get comfortable with it. That's true of all change. When race, sexual orientation, or class is added to the mix, it can create that reaction, while normal, can be very painful to other people. And some people are so freaked out by their own reaction, they just want to stop the change, whatever it is, right? Shut that change. Change is too uncomfortable for me.
So looking at the model, I love that you dove right in and shared an overbearing story, because not many people want to go there. But I'd love to hear, when I talk to folks about the model, oftentimes I hear from women, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was in minimizing. Like, this is actually describing my experience that I didn't know was happening.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts or experiences that you relate back to that minimizing area.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely as a woman, I have had to navigate a man's world. And I was very much raised by a mother who instilled in me, that we're constantly having to meet men's expectations, please men, be attractive to men, make men happy. And so, that's definitely there. I'm seeing it now as I parent and what pops up in my head. As a woman, I have definitely experienced active sexism. I've experienced levels of, I was molested by a man in a grocery store as a child in second grade. I have been on dates where I wasn't sure they would stop when I was saying no, and realized that I didn't know how this was going to turn out. So, it was interesting. I did a webinar during the Me Too movement explaining the science behind power and harassment, both from the harasser's biology as well as the survivor's biology. In putting that together, I realized, oh my gosh, there's all these moments that I've experienced this. But as a woman, you're taught that the stats aren't good, that you will likely be assaulted in your lifetime, and you're taught ways to protect yourself. And that's woven into how we're educated about how to navigate the world. I remember having this one interesting moment. I used to teach college students, and we were teaching privilege and oppression in a class. Young men in particular, when they're navigating this concept of queer identity, young men, 18-year-old men who identify themselves as straight, oftentimes get very uncomfortable with the conversation. And I remembered this gentleman sharing a story about how his parents had a business in San Francisco, and they expected him to work at a table during a gay pride event. He was sharing the story about how bothered he was because while he sat at this table, guys were walking by and catcalling and whistling at him. And one guy handed him his phone number, and he was horrified that he experienced some sexual attention that he did not want. And the 18-year-old girls in the classroom just looked at him and were like, dude, I'm a waitress. That happens to me every day. Every shift I work, that's how I'm treated. And it got me thinking, this is really an important thing to unpack, because I think particularly white straight men grow up in such a world of privilege that they're not used to not having control over how they're treated or how people perceive them. And I thought, we really need to give young people better skills around that, so they're not so shooken if it happens to them. Nobody was attacking him. Nobody was assaulting him. They were just flirting with him, and it freaked him out. But I realized that he was not used to that. He was not used to being in a position where it was expected that would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely experienced that a lot from straight friends. Like, oh, I can't go to a gay bar because I don't want to get hit on. I'm like, well, why? Who cares? So something I was thinking of, I want to rewind a little bit, because we were talking about your experience of assault and or just kind of, unwanted advances, or no, is no going to stop this? The other side of that being your mother, who's like, you need to be attractive to men. You need to pull that in. I'm curious. I want to dig into that a little bit more, because you're sitting in the middle of that. What's like, I don't know. I'm going to stop there and see what you're thinking, how that's resonating.
I think this is not an area of research, so my brain is kind of figuring out what this is. But I think women in this society, in American society, and certainly of a generation, I don't think this is true for teenagers today, but it was very much, you are in the male gaze. And so you want to date and attract a good husband. My dad really told me, you should learn to golf because the rich guys, the ones that would make good husbands, golf, and you're going to meet them on a golf course. So this whole thing around like ultimately your goal, and it was true for their generation. My mom definitely lived in a generation where you needed to get that husband. Then the husband at the time, I mean, this was not that long ago. The husbands were able to know the medical records. Husbands could choose mental health treatments for their wives. All of this was the reality of that time and place. They were raised with those values and they instilled us to the next generation. So I was definitely raised with this idea of you need to attract a man, you need to be pretty, not too loud, not too smart. Being too smart will scare some men. So I had messages around dumbing myself down, not laughing too loud, looking cute. But you're right, like doing those behaviors then become the very things that make it your fault when something happens to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I should look cute and I should be appealing to go on a date and be asked to date. But then later, those things are then used to victim blame, right? So how men are taught to read those signals, I think is really interesting too, in terms of how much it gives them permission, right? And we're seeing a lot of this in the conversations right now around bodily autonomy and the role of women's bodies in society. We're really going backwards right now, and it's very scary. But I think that there are a group of men who really want to return to the days where they owned a woman and the woman stayed home and made their dinner and did her whole job was to make him comfortable. And that world doesn't exist anymore. And I can imagine for those who got to live that world, it feels like a real bummer to lose all of that. I don't know. It's hard. It's a big question.
Yeah, no, it is. But you've actually illuminated something for me that relating it back to the minimizing area of the model, what I'm hearing from you is all of these messages that you were getting was programming minimizing into you, right? Is like, forget about who you are and who you want to be. Here's all of these messages that you need to abide by so that you attract other people, so that other people are comfortable, right? And I don't know that I've heard it that explicitly. I think there's the undertone of, like I said, I hear from a lot of women that they are like, wow, minimizing I didn't realize that's where I sat a lot. But I haven't heard anyone so clearly articulate that it is the programmed societal messages that put you there.
Yeah, I've had the experience of, in my own work as an anti-racist, in my own work as an ally, be honored to have people of color share their authentic stories with us and talking about the messages they grew up with around being acceptable and minimizing their risk of being a target, right? Don't drive while black, that whole thing around, well, Carell's story, I'm never going to run out of a store. Who taught him that? Right. Even if his parents didn't explicitly say it, most Black parents definitely tell their children how to avoid being attacked or being the target of police. He picked it up in school. He picked it up by watching the news. He picked it up by seeing what happened in his neighborhood. All children of targeted communities are getting those messages. Here are some survival tactics to make the group in power happy with you, how you dress, how you speak, how you engage, and also how to protect yourself from when members of that same community cross over and are intending you harm, how to survive that harm or how to minimize that harm. It's a very complex set of messages that make it really hard to navigate.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, I just keep bouncing all of this at the model and thinking about, one of the things I love about this podcast is talking to people, and it's helping me see new perspectives on the work. And I talk a lot about, Recluse I don't talk a lot about it, but what I talk about in Recluse is that it's okay if that's what you need to be safe.
Right.
And it's interesting because part of me wants to say, hey, let's use this kind of conversation to illuminate and say, let's rethink this social programming and allow people to be themselves. The whole world isn't necessarily ready for that.
Oh.
And so it's a careful balance of knowing when you need to protect yourself versus finding spaces where you can belong. In my last episode with Vanessa, we talked about how she, as a trans woman, first found her community of other trans folks. And it was the first time she really felt like she could move into being herself and being in a place of belonging. I love this idea of we don't necessarily have to belong everywhere. It would be nice, it would be great, but there are those places where we comfortably belong. And I'm curious, what have those spaces been for you?
That's a great question. And the one thing I would say about the model is we don't live in one quadrant all the time. We're bouncing back in these spaces. It's very contextual who we are around and what signals we're picking up in the environment in that moment. I could see you feel one way in your house and you get in the car and you feel another way on the road. And then you pop into a coffee shop and you feel another way there. And then you get to your office and you feel another way there. It's constantly moving. I think we're in agreement, though, that we need to continue to do the work to get rid of the structures and the long held views and beliefs that create this whole thing. Nobody's happy in this environment, right? Everyone's feeling tied to it. It's just folks with power want to continue it, but they're not even happy with it either. I think we're going to get there. We're making progress, but it's painful and it's hard. In terms of my sense of belonging, another thing to know about my background, my mom's mental illness meant that she couldn't keep a job. So she had borderline personality disorder, which means that she struggled a lot to have successful relationships. We moved every single year of my childhood. I never went to the same school twice, and sometimes I moved in the middle of a school year. Sometimes I'd come home from school and the house would be packed and we'd be leaving that night. I got very good at being friendly with people and then never feeling like I belonged anywhere. The only sense of belonging I had as a child was honestly with my cats. I am still a lifelong cat lover. They were my safe space. I feel like I was parented by my cat because they would be the one that would comfort me and make me feel safe. And so wherever we fed the cat was home. As I moved to college and started leaving that unhealthy family system and started to see what other systems look like, honestly, my first place of belonging was when I started doing some of this work around anti-racism. I got in with the crowd on campus of student leaders and resident assistants where we were exploring these ideas. I actually felt a lot of kinship with people who'd been targeted for their identity because I'd always felt attacked and unsafe in my childhood because of my mom. So there was an understanding of navigating fear and being blamed for stuff that's not your fault that made me really resonate with those communities. But then it was really painful as I learned that my own identity caused discomfort and the way I was raised caused discomfort. So it was eye-opening as I had to unlearn some stuff and learn new things. But I would say that was my first real place of belonging. Then, of course, we all find that tribe of people that get us and we get them. And that's the group that I was on that trip with. And we're still lifelong friends. And then as a professional, I definitely belonged in school. Living in my head and being smart was one of my survival tactics. So I did really good in school environments. I knew the rules made sense at school. And if I just followed the rules, I would get good grades. Very unlike my home where the rules changed constantly. So I think academic world was another place I felt very much like I belonged, hence why I have 3 degrees and made my way through that. Yeah.
It all makes sense.
I mean, you've known me for a long time, Justice. I feel like you're getting the whole background into why Britt is the way she is.
Yeah, yes, I appreciate it. Well, let's transition to your academic work. That was a place you belonged, and that's what really was the foundation of your career and has been for a long time. And now you've authored 4 books on the neuroscience of success. I would love to dig in. You've done a lot of research related to this topic of belonging. So I'm curious what you could share. How does it bump up against the creating belonging model?
Yeah, it doesn't bump up against it. I think more than anything, it reinforces it. there'd be a couple things I'd want to share. One is the brain science of exclusion and what happens when we feel excluded. There's really profound and consistent research that even the neuroscientists were kind of blown away by. They wanted to study exclusion. So they put people in an MRI machine to understand what happens with the brain when we're being excluded. So they created this mild exclusion experience where they put 3 or 4 people in MRI machines. They gave them an iPad and they were playing cyberball with each other. Eventually, the ball stopped being thrown to you, but you could tell the other 3 people were playing. They did that round and around so that each person got excluded. I mean, mild form of exclusion, right? So the brain lit up, but what blew their minds was that the part of the brain that lit up was the pain center, where we feel physical pain. And so that led them to do a ton more studies. What happens if you're being excluded by someone you don't like? So it had a whole bunch of African-American participants be excluded by members of the Ku Klux Klan, still lit up the pain center. They had people who'd recently broken up talk about that journey of feeling rejected, lit up the pain center. The research is really clear that we experience exclusion the same way that we experience being hit neurologically. This makes sense, right? We are a tribal species. We are designed for living and working together. Our chances of survival were much greater when we were in a tribe and a community. Our brain is constantly tracking where we are in the group. And if we are seeing signs that we're getting marginalized or pushed to the edges, everything in our biology is saying, get back in with the crowd because we won't survive if we're ousted. What was really fascinating was that the researchers who were studying this said, now that we have consistent, clear evidence that it's the pain center that's getting lit up, what happens if we give people painkillers? And they did everything from mild Advil and Tylenol to heavy duty Oxycontin. And it consistently unhooked that feeling of rejection. It unhooked that experience of exclusion. I theorize that this is a big part of what's driving the opioid epidemic, is that people are going on painkillers for legitimate injuries. You break your arm, it hurts. When you take a painkiller, it doesn't work at the arm, it works in the brain, disconnecting your sensation of pain until it wears off and then it starts to hurt again, you got to take another pill. While you're on that painkiller for your broken arm, you are getting an invisible, unspoken break from the social pain you have in your life, where you don't feel like you fit in with your family or in society or at your job. So all of a sudden, you're getting this invisible medication and we don't talk about it. So then when people are coming off of the pain meds because they're healed, all of a sudden they're feeling all kinds of really distressing emotions. And so I think there's a real connection we need to look at there. So that's one piece of data that I would highlight. What are your thoughts about that? How does that resonate for you?
One of the things it was making me think about, and I'm familiar with that research from our work together, one thing that is just popping up in my head now is that we see more abuse, drug abuse, addiction in marginalized communities.
Yep.
And so it makes sense, right?
Self-
Like that's what's happening there.
Yeah.
Is, it is that societal exclusion, the marginalization that then is causing individuals to become addicted to any array of things. So that's what's popping up in my head now.
Yeah. The research on exclusion is really clear. Your productivity goes down, your sleep goes down, you start to struggle with your performance, you actually get sick more. There's a real connection with self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, right? So that can lead to addiction and also a cycle of shame over time, increased depression, increased anxiety, and higher likelihoods of suicide. The data is super clear on it. And that's why, I think we all need to be focused on how do we create authentic communities of belonging where people can show up and be honored and respected for who they are. You don't have to be liked. You don't even have to be popular. We let people be, and then they can find their own pockets of belonging. Everything that's happening right now, we're just targeting communities and banning ideas and regulating people's freedoms. It's a last ditch effort to try to control this thing that's already happening. We're becoming a more tolerant and welcoming society. Some people are freaked out by that. So it's a last gasp of some desperate measures to try to control that. Unfortunately, those measures are doing a lot of harm to people.
Yes.
The new book is out. It's Wired to Become: The Brain Science of Finding Your Purpose, Creating Meaningful Work, and Achieving Your Potential. But what was really interesting is that when people have a sense of purpose in their life, it tends to make them much more comfortable with diversity and accepting of others. I think it's because if you're feeling fulfilled and on path in your own life, you just don't care what's happening in other people's lives. It's not threatening to you because you know you're doing your own thing. So I think we want to focus on helping everyone feel like they belong and have fulfilling lives and are on purpose. Because if folks have that, they're going to be less concerned with trying to go after other people. The second part of the research that's really interesting is when you're a marginalized community and you're on the receiving ends of stereotypes. So there's this whole body of research called the stereotype threat, which means when you know you're stereotyped in a negative way, it impacts you. You go into a room and you're more nervous because you know people are seeing you in that negative light. And so performance tends to go down, anxiety tends to go up. People experience things as a result of being on the receiving end of negative stereotypes. When they are reminded or focusing on their own sense of purpose, it diminishes the impact of the harm. So it creates a shield to diminish the impact. We need to work on getting rid of that harm, but until we do, places where we feel connected and where we belong, as well as when we have a sense of purpose, can help us navigate those difficult situations. I think that's powerful.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so on the first part that you were talking about, where when we have a sense of purpose, our tolerance for diversity improves.
Yep.
Okay, so something was hitting me, and I'm curious if there's any relationship that you've seen. So I know in your work, you talk a lot about we as humans are wired to do three things in order: survive, belong, become. They have to come in that order. Well, I feel like purpose it's that becoming piece, right? But when we're there, it then shepherds in belonging for others. I'm wondering in your research how that all came together.
Survive, belong, become is just kind of a shortened version of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Which is you don't have food or water, that is going to be the most pressing thing, right? So it's really that you need to tend to your immediate survival needs. And once you can tend to your immediate survival needs, our next need is to feel like we belong, to have friends, to connect to a meaningful community, or go do something fun if I don't even know if I can buy groceries today. So it's just this immediacy of our survival. Physical survival first, then we need belonging. We need to be part of a community. We need to be accepted for who we are. That's also tied to survival because our chances of survival are greater when we live with others, back to kind of our old days living on the plain, so to speak. If you were ousted by the tribe, your chances of getting eaten by the lion were much greater than when you were living with others. But our deepest need, and it's not like it goes away while we're struggling with being able to eat or whatever, but our deepest need is to hunger to learn and grow and become our best selves. I think every person wants to achieve their potential, whatever that looks like. But we can put that on pause while we attend to these other things that are more immediate. But the minute those are somewhat satisfied, people want to live fulfilling lives. So I think that that's really the strongest thread. And then sometimes we're pulled away from that because these other things become more pressing. But it's our deepest need to become who we're meant to be and feel like we're living a life of purpose. And this is why it's so up right now. People hungering for more purpose and meaningful work is off the charts because we all just lived through a pandemic that not only, put our mortality in sharp focus, but it gave us a lot of time to reflect on how we're spending our time and if we're in the right fit. Many people got a break from the toxic workplace and then we're strong, like, I don't want to go back there. That place didn't feel safe, so I'm going to go somewhere else. The Great Resignation, all of that. So I don't think they're antithetical to each other. I think they're all related. It's just we sometimes have to stop our focus on one to attend to something else that's immediate.
Yeah, I know there are individuals that, when they don't have community, when they don't have belonging, then channel everything into something. Like they become high achievers in some area in a very isolated way. I'm curious if that is real purpose and becoming, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm laughing because that's me. I definitely took a lot of my pain that I had not yet faced or even identified and channeled it into academic success. As I started doing therapy and digging into some of my wounds, I realized, My mom literally would say things to me like she wished that she'd had an abortion. No one would ever love me. I was a terrible person. And I've forgiven her. She was mentally ill and didn't get the support she needed. And even worse, she was horribly abused as a child. She was sexually molested most of her child by both her father and her brother. That's a very common response to that kind of trauma. But, she did the best she could. She was very unhealthy. She passed on some of that unhealth to me, and I had to do my own work around it. But like for me, since I was getting all these negative messages at home, when a teacher was happy with me and that world made sense, boy, that was super rewarding. I'm sure I was getting so much serotonin and dopamine at school. So I just got really good at doing that. This is where I got messages that maybe I am a good person. Maybe people do like me. But as I eventually got enough of that to counterbalance what was happening at home, and of course I moved away from home, then as that healing work started to find some fullness of fruition, that freed me up to not be so driven by it. Before, it was probably an unhealthy drive to be accepted in that environment or to have that sense of purpose. Now that I'm feeling more fulfilled and complete and healed, that drive isn't so intense. So now it can be more a place of choice. I don't think there's any clear example or clear answer. I always love Brene Brown's work, and she talked about her own journey to embracing her own vulnerability and authenticity. I think we're all on a journey of that, right? We all have things that we were taught as children. You don't get to adulthood without some scars and wounds. Those scars and wounds look different for each of us, but we share that journey. We all engage in behaviors to try to heal ourselves. Addiction is also an attempt to heal yourself in a different way.
You gave me the answer I was looking for.
Literally, I aim to please.
I know, right? You mentioned one thing. In school, you would do good work and get praise. And I'm assuming that fulfilled that belonging need. Like, oh, these are people that think I matter, right?
Yeah.
And then it becomes a virtuous cycle almost, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where, oh, I'm getting validation. And maybe that's where that comes from, where we see those people that may have one area of their life that is they don't have belonging, they don't feel comfortable. They find the path that gives them validation and reward. And so they do go up that survive, belong, become path, but it's a little jumbly and it does work in order.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to say about myself that I was someone who loved school so much, I never left. I did school, and then I did undergrad, and I did master's, and then I did a PhD. And then I worked at a university as a faculty member and as a dean for 20 years. I stayed in that very safe world for a long time. But when I finally was ready to leave, it was because I was finally healed. I did a lot of work. What was interesting is when I was in that world, all of my work focused on helping young adults transition into becoming their full selves. I built freshman experience courses. I built leadership programs. It all had a tone of, how do we help you on your journey of individuating and healing and becoming who you want to be? Even then, I was healing myself through the work I was doing with others. I think it's fascinating that we hunger for that in conscious and unconscious ways. But that doesn't mean the work we're doing in that space is a wrong choice. In fact, it can be super beneficial to others.
Yeah. So what a great moment to, you recently released the Wired to Become book about purpose. And, I think you can point back to so many areas of your life that were on purpose for various reasons. So what a fun book to have in your library.
Yeah. For those of you who are interested in reading it, it's a combination of the research on what we know about purpose and what it means to us neurologically. It's also a live journaling exercise. It's intended to give people tools, strategies, and exercises to get more clear about their own sense of purpose. We don't just have one purpose and that's it. It's a journey of experiences that influence and shape the next part of the journey. So I'm partway through my journey. I feel like I'm in a good place and my journey will continue. Other people are reflecting on where they are. It's a really good book for the times we are living in right now. I also want to say that some of the behavior, I feel compelled to say this, when I look at what's happening in the world and we're seeing some of the actions of people creating an environment that's very harmful for others, they're finding belonging in that. Like people who identify a certain way politically or identify a certain way philosophically or with their religious values, they're also on their own journey to finding a sense of belonging and meaning, but somehow theirs is defined by taking it away from others. I think we need to be mindful of the journey of the message one is raised with, how it's defined for you to be a good person or a right person, and the kinds of communities you end up being part of and what those communities are telling you are the way to behave. Belonging is a powerful thing. People who offer belonging through the act of harming others, that's what extremist groups engage in. They look for people who don't feel like they belong and offer belonging. The act of belonging is often the act of harming others. I write about this in the Wired to Connect book. And I think where we get in trouble is if we keep engaging in judging each other, we somehow don't get at the core issue that really needs to be resolved, which is folks need to feel respected and that there's a place for them. I hope that made sense, but I think it's important to talk about that because we can keep making people bad and wrong and then they don't have a path back.
Yes. I've been on that journey for the past 2 years, really working on giving grace to those individuals in a way of like, okay, I understand that there is something pulling you into this and some biological need that's probably shifting you in this direction of harming others. Not that I want to be permissive of that, but I think when we can approach those individuals more humanely, we have a better way of connecting with them and bringing them back to being able to respect everyone and give everyone space because there's room for us.
Yeah, there is room for everyone. And I think we just need to keep looking at that. How do we create space for everyone, not that there's one way versus another or one side's going to dominate another.
Well, Britt, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I loved it so much. Maybe we'll start another one. I don't know. We'll see. I want to give you a moment to plug anything that you want to plug. Obviously, the book Wired to Become. Where can people find it or anything else that you want to share?
Thank you. I've got 4 books on different topics. One's on how the brain learns. One is how we move through change. One is the whole connection, belonging, exclusion piece. And then the last one, which just came out, is the one on becoming and purpose and all of that. You can find my books wherever books are sold. So look there. You can also go to my website, which is just my name, brittandreatta.com. I love to connect with people on LinkedIn. If you are in a position of rolling out training or leadership development in your organization, I create science-based training solutions that have these principles and practices woven into the training. We've seen organizations have amazing results using a brain science approach to training. So those are all the ways folks can see what I'm up to. I love the idea of a podcast, Justin. Let's talk more about that.
All right, let's do it. Britt, thank you so much. Britt is the final regular guest on this season. In 1 week, we will be doing a LinkedIn Live where I will have a handful of past guests from this season just to talk about our experiences, our conversations, bring everyone together. And then that LinkedIn Live will come the final episode of this season of the Creating Belonging podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Britt, thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, Justin. I love this podcast. I'm so glad you've been doing it.
Thank you.